We start with a stress response that we have inherited from our hunter-gatherer ancestors, the fight or flight response. But how many of the stresses in your life can you handle by either fighting them or running from them?
We're living in a very stressful world right now when you look at international conflict in Europe, cost of living crisis, economic uncertainty, post-pandemic world. A lot of people have a personal philosophy of the best way of trying to navigate these times is avoiding stress, minimize it entirely, compared to maybe trying to build up their own resilience. What's the optimal approach here if you are feeling incredibly stressful about your circumstances? Should you try and tackle it head on or try and maybe hide away from it?
Okay. Well, to begin with, you can't hide away from it. If you think you are, you're fooling yourself. So we have to accept reality. That's the first step. And then find the best ways of learning to deal with the stresses in our lives. And yes, it is a big job, but the good news is it's doable.
What are some of the biggest mistakes people make when they try to build up their resilience? Are there some common errors you see time and time again where people are maybe looking for that resilience in the wrong place or trying to stimulate it in the wrong way?
I think people really don't know how to build resilience. That's the first problem. They don't know where to look, what to do, and most of the time people are winding up just trying to get by. In fact, I was listening to Michelle Obama as she was being interviewed about her latest book, and she was saying, you know, people are just trying to live their lives, and I think that's true, but it misses the point. It's like when we think of how do we handle stress, do we try and avoid stress? And the key really is learning how to adapt to what we are dealing with in our lives, accepting and dealing with it, rather than either trying to shrink from it, or as Michelle Obama was saying, and what most people think about is sort of just hanging from our fingertips, right? It actually doesn't take any more energy. In fact, there's less energy used when you figure out how to adapt to the world in the most optimal way.
And what is the starting point for having a philosophy such as that? Because it sounds like it's an essential tool that most people need in their arsenal to better navigate the world. What's the starting point and how do we build from there?
Yeah. So first is to accept where we're at, as opposed to being upset at where we're at, because that just produces more stress. So acceptance is really the first key. And unfortunately, we actually, when we begin to look around at how we're dealing with life, we start with 2 strikes against us. So it's unfortunate, but that's part of our reality. So the first strike is that we have a stress response that does not fit our environment. We start with a stress response that we have inherited from our hunter-gatherer ancestors, the fight or flight response. But how many of the stresses in your life can you handle by either fighting them or running from them? Okay, so our bodies mobilize, and then we have to hold that energy in. So we don't have an unlimited amount of energy. And if we're using it all the time to mobilize for dangers, we don't have enough energy for healing and maintenance. Bodies have a choice, defend and protect, or heal and recover. And so we start off with a stress response that's inappropriate, and we have to figure that one out. And then the second, what I refer to as our second mismatch, that's the environmental evolutionary mismatch. We also have a developmental mismatch. And that's between the environment in which we learned how to use our stress response, our childhood environment, with our adult environment. We don't, as a child, we don't go out and sample the world for what's the best approach. We adapt to our little world that's basically our primary caregivers, and we have to adapt to them. But we don't know the difference. And so our brains literally develop based on those childhood lessons. Our brain doesn't say, oh, well, let's adapt to this, and then when we get to the real big world out there, we'll learn to do it better. No. Our earliest learning is our survival learning. Our brains develop based on that. And then to some degree, our ability to adapt gets locked into that childhood environment. And we live our adult lives based on those lessons. And so when we talk about how to become more resilient, we have to, number one, relearn a healthier response to stress that's more of a calm focus as opposed to a fight or flight. And then two, we have to recognize the bad messages, the conditioning, the learning from our childhood that we have to now relearn to adapt to our present environment. So those are the starting points. And I lay this out in my model of resilience that has 9 components to it, in which every one of these components has to do with one aspect of living optimally and being available to learn new lessons based on our current environment.
I wanted to pick up on one of those components with self-regulation skills, because facing that stress in that first instance sounds almost critical in how you deal with it, and finding an appropriate response that matches the stressor. How does an individual develop those self-regulation skills to better manage their emotional reactions to stress and pressure, especially when you're in that high pressure situation, when it can be very hard to maintain a calm exterior and a calm interior? Right.
Well, again, it begins by accepting where we're at. And where we're at is that we have a nervous system that's probably more elevated than it needs to be, because we encounter one stress after another in our lives, in our day. And so we ramp our bodies up to handle the stress. And then before we have the opportunity to recover, we handle another stress and then another stress. So like a rubber band, it's sort of like stretching and stretching without allowing it to recover. So it's, again, recognizing that's what our reality is, and then finding the time, the opportunity in each and every day so the stress response engages one branch of our nervous system, the sympathetic branch, activation, adrenaline, to mobilize our bodies. We need to engage the other component of the nervous system, the parasympathetic, the recovery branch, that helps restore all the resources used up when we activate the nervous system. And those two branches of the nervous system need to be in balance. And so the process is to find some practice on a daily basis that helps us engage that parasympathetic recovery system, so we retrain the body into a better place of balance.
And where would a good place for somebody who's never really thought about this type of work, where should they begin? Is it as simple as some breathing exercises, mindfulness? What are your recommendations for someone with no experience of thinking about these things to begin?
Okay, so step one is to really get that you can't burn the candle at both ends. You can't just keep borrowing resources from the body for more and more stress. You have to restore. So it's that acceptance of that reality. And then when you accept that reality, you realize, well, I spend all my time during my day in stressful behavior, I need to find some time each day to train my body to recover, to practice some form of relaxation. There are many forms. It starts with your breath, okay? It's something we do nonstop, right? And so that's a beginning point, because there are breathing patterns that contribute to stress, and then there are breathing patterns that actually encourage recovery, okay? For example, and there isn't one type. There are many different breathing patterns, breathing approaches. This is something that is one of the longest histories that we have back to ancient times of optimal breathing patterns, but one that I like to use because we've now learned that when you breathe at approximately 6 breaths per minute, you engage a number of physiological systems in the body and bring them into alignment, and it facilitates what we refer to as heart rate variability. You're nodding your head, so you're familiar with this, you know about that. So you can practice breathing at about 6 breaths per minute, which encourages recovery and balance in the body. And then the more you practice it, the more you get a sense of what 6 breaths per minute feels like is in terms of experience. So throughout the day, you can have reminders to do a couple of minutes of that breathing pattern. For it to be most effective, you want to find at least one time during the day that you do at least 10 to 20 minutes of it. And, some people say to me, well, you do 10 to 20 minutes. What good is that when throughout the day you're stressing? Well, if you want to build muscles, you're not weightlifting 24 hours a day. You're doing it to train those muscles, to help those muscles build. And then you could do a exercise that then encourages your muscles in a particular direction. The same thing is with breathing and with the breath. One of the things that I do is called biofeedback. So biofeedback is a way of using a device to monitor some aspect of your physiology. It could be heart rate variability. Mm-hmm. It could be skin temperature at your fingertip, which measures blood flow, which changes based on stress and relaxation. Muscle tension. You could actually put an electrode, a surface electrode on a muscle and monitor how much tension is in that muscle. The idea behind biofeedback is you get to see or hear what's going on inside your body, so that when you do something that helps you relax, you hear a change in a tone or a change in the signal that lets you know you're going in the right direction, or that tells you you're going in the wrong direction. Either way, that feedback encourages better and better relaxation, calming of the nervous system, which is really a main goal in that process. There's mindfulness training, but there are there's different forms of meditation. Most of them are designed to rebalance your nervous system.
You also talk about mental agility in building resilience. Just how important is that mental agility? And also, what exactly do you mean by the mental agility in this context?
Right. So, our thinking directs where our body goes. Now, we can react emotionally, and then that will direct our thinking, but we have some control over our thinking, and so if we use our thinking appropriately, it can guide us in the right direction. So, when you wake up in the morning, do you look for what can go wrong, or do you look for what can go right? This has to do with our history. If you grow up in an environment that's dangerous, where your parents may get angry at you for no reason or little reason, where they may be judgmental or critical, or your parents may be doing their best, but they're stressed because of their worries about finances, And so as a child, they don't have to say anything for you to pick up on danger. Okay? So your history guides where your thinking goes as an adult. And so for many people that I see, they wake up in the morning and they're anxious, nervous, because they're thinking what can go wrong in their day, in their lives. Okay? So here's a good starting point. When you wake up in the morning, focus on what can go right. Look for what can go right. So this is mindset. Okay? A positive mindset has a positive effect on your stress and how stress plays a role in your life. So that's a good example. When people have something to do that's difficult, they may all immediately go to, oh my goodness, that's difficult. When we say that's difficult, that already is sending us in a particular direction. If it's difficult, then we start to worry about how well we're going to do. If we're a perfectionist and we worry about people's judgments, all of these are mental factors that encourage more stress in our lives, in our experience. The more we believe there's going to be a positive outcome, or the more that we accept that mistakes happen, that if there's a mistake, okay, I'll deal with it. It's not the end of the world. All of these mental factors, ways of thinking about our lives, determine how resilient we are.
There's no doubt that having an optimistic or positive outlook immediately improves your quality of life, but there's also research that it suggests you'll live longer. It'll improve the length of your life.
Definitely.
So everyone knows that this is an avenue that they should pursue. What about someone who's sitting watching this who would love to be optimistic or positive, but there's just too much going on? They're too deep in the quagmire of uncertainty and stress. Is there a way they can kind of kickstart a way of being more positive, or just having a more optimistic outlook?
Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of people that I work with, when we talk about these things and I talk about being more positive, they'll always say to me, but I'm a realist, like, this could happen and that could happen. So being resilient and having a positive attitude doesn't mean you ignore potential dangers, potential pitfalls. But what you want to do with those things is you want to address them. Okay, if this happens, how will I deal with it? But once you come up with a plan, then any additional focus on that I refer to as worry. So planning is helpful, part of being resilient. Any continual energy that you give to that negative outcome after you've already determined how you would handle it is wasteful, and energy that needs to be used for your body's healing, for example.
So is this the same component as emotional intelligence, or is that something different?
Emotional intelligence is a broad term that has to do with how you handle your emotions and the best ways of handling your emotions. And cognitive approaches fit in there, but that's more focused on how you handle your emotions. Yeah.
So how would that work in this instance of trying to build resilience then? How can someone cultivate a healthier emotional intelligence to alleviate some of the concerns which we've talked about?
Okay. So when we get into the arena of our emotions, I begin with the notion that emotions are not right or wrong. Okay? If you have an emotion, it's real. You can't push it to the side. You can't say, well, I shouldn't be feeling this. If you're feeling it, it's there. And once it's there, it needs to be addressed. So a healthy approach to your emotions is, number one, to acknowledge them, not try and push them to the side. Number two, one of the notions around emotions is that it's what we refer to as part of the Gestalt psychological approach. And that has to do with how our bodies are organized so that when something develops inside of us, we need to figure a way to take it to conclusion, to get resolution, that's when you could let it go without it causing residuals in your body. So we all carry around a lot of unfinished emotional business from past, and past could be our childhood or it could be yesterday. Resilience, my sixth component of resilience, is emotional balance and mastery. And what that means is that you don't ignore feelings that come up, but you deal with them in a constructive way to get resolution. So if a feeling comes up, if I notice I'm angry, like the other day, I was trying to untie a knot, right? and I realized how angry I was getting because I wasn't able to do it, right? And I'm looking at this and what's going on here? This is an inanimate object and I'm getting angry at it. And then from experience, I realized when I have an overreaction to a situation, that's letting me know that I'm carrying some unfinished business. So then I check in with myself, I'm still angry about this phone call from this morning. Okay. All right, how do I let go of that? I'm sitting with this feeling, this anger, this emotion. How do I let go of it? And I realized in that phone conversation, I was dealing with somebody who I wanted him to have a different response to what I had to say, but I wasn't getting it, okay? And here's a really important place in these kinds of situations, because if I held on to that need that that person be different, I'll never let go of the anger because that person isn't going to respond the way I want him to respond. And now people can think about this with regard to so many of their relationships, particularly close family members, who we have certain needs and want them to respond in certain ways, but that's not within our control. Whenever we want something that's out of our control, we're stuck, okay? And that's how a lot of people feel about emotions and unfinished emotional business. They feel stuck because they're wanting this other person to be different. Please hear me, please notice me, notice my feelings, and people can connect this to so many relationships in their lives. So how do you resolve this unfinished business emotions? In my case, I realized I have to disconnect my resolution from that person doing anything. And then I realized, okay, this is my responsibility, these feelings in me. And what I did was I imagined that person in the room with me and I yelled at him. But I yelled at him from the place of awareness and acceptance. He's not going to change, but I have to get the feeling out. And then I got the feeling out. I realized I'm not going to get what I want from this guy. I have to move on in my life. And I let go. Now, of course, if it's someone close to you, that process is more difficult, but the process is still the same.